This is Emily Hull with the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program at the Oklahoma State University Library. Today is Tuesday, December 11th, 2018, and I'm in Santa Fe, New Mexico, interviewing Dorothy Alexander for the Deep Roots Oklahoma Authors Oral History Project. Dorothy, you're a poet, a retired attorney and judge, the founder and publisher of Village Books Press, and a person who can speak to what it means to make a literary life. Thank you for joining me today.
You're welcome.
Dorothy, we've had some time to talk before recording this interview, so let me start with Western Oklahoma. Take us to Roger Mills County, where you were born and raised. What was it like?
Roger Mills County, well, to start with, I was born during the Dust Bowl and in the middle of the Great Depression. And it was a far different place than it is now. I was born of rural parents, farmers, ranchers. My parents had lived there. My parents were both born there, and my grandparents and great-grandparents came there. So I was a third generation Roger Millian, as we call him. I didn't know there was an outside world other than Roger Mills County until December 7th, 1941, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. And that was my awakening to any world outside of that county. That county, the community where I lived, my parents' home, my grandparents' home, the little town where we went on Saturday, and the little school that I attended was my entire world. And it has played a big part in my life, especially my literary life, and my heart will probably always be there in that little community.
So how would you describe the land and town that you went to on Saturdays?
It was probably a harsh land, although it didn't seem that way to me then. I can see now that it was a harsh land, especially during those Dust Bowl years when the great dust storms came, and very, very frightening. I can remember Black Sunday. Vaguely, I was a very small child. But to me, in those days, it was a safe place because it was the only home I'd ever known. And it seemed safe to me. And looking back, I can see that it wasn't all that safe because of the climate change and the drought, and also associated with a lot of people going away because a lot of people left, but my family stayed.
So what do you remember about Black Sunday?
I remember early in the morning how nice it was, how the sun was out. And though it was a Sunday, my father went to the field. He took his horses and went to plow because nice sunny days like that were rare, and he needed to get the work done. My mother took the opportunity to do her washing. She hung her laundry out on the clothesline. And in the afternoon, my mother and I were having lunch, and it seemed to get dark. And my mother thought a rainstorm was coming, and she ran to get her clothes off the line. And by the time she got them in, it was almost dark, and my mother realized it was a dust storm. And so my father wasn't there. We didn't have a storm cellar, so my mother decided that she and I would go to the neighbors to the storm cellar. And we ran, and by the time we got there, it was almost totally dark. And we went in the cellar. There were other neighbors there, and we all huddled in the cellar. And the storm passed over. It was very frightening. The men had to hold the door with a chain, hold the door down to keep the wind from sucking the door off. The barometric pressure went down to the point that it was hurting my ears, and I was crying. And then the fruit jars, canned goods that the neighbor lady had on the shelf started exploding. And it was a very frightening day. It's one of my most vivid memories of childhood, how frightening that day was, and how frightened we were for my father because we didn't know what had happened to him in the field until we got home, which was way after dark. The neighbor man had to walk us home, and my father had just come in with the horses. The horses had panicked and ran away from him. And
where did he take cover? How did
he took cover in a culvert under the road, under the little dirt road, and crawled in this tin horn in this tube that went under the road, and he crawled in there, and he was completely covered with mud and dirt when we saw him. It was a very frightening time.
Did it make him sick afterwards?
No, not at that time. I've often wondered why we didn't all have pneumonia, because
so I was wondering.
At night, my mother, in fact, that night, my mother wet washcloths, and we slept with washcloths over our faces at night. And when you woke up in the morning, you could see where your mouth and your nostrils had been because of the dust. There was like mud had collected on that part. But it was very frightening. I think a lot of people did have pneumonia, dust pneumonia at that time, but we survived.
Did you dream about it
later?
No,
I don't think I've ever had dreams about those particular storms. I've dreamed about tornadoes later, but no, I don't think I've dreamed about dust storms.
And your grandparents and great-grandparents, what's their connection to Oklahoma?
My great-grandparents, my father's grandparents came from Missouri, from a little town called Steelville, which is about halfway between Springfield and St. Louis. And they came in the 1890s and settled after first trying to settle in down on the Washita River near Chickasha. They moved on west. My grandfather was a teenager, and he had a younger brother. They'd started out with 4 children, my great-grandparents had, and the 2 older children died while they were at the little town, a little settlement called Dawsburg, which is no longer exists. And it was so sad for my great-grandmother. They moved on west and ended up in Roger Mills County. On the way, they stopped at a wagon yard in Chickasha, and that's where my grandfather met my grandmother.
Oh.
She rode through the wagon yard on her horse, and he apparently fell in love with her as she rode through, and he took one of his father's draft horses that had been pulling their wagon and rode after her and caught up with her. And they were together for only 2 days and decided to marry once he had become of age and could homestead his own land. And I suppose they wrote letters to each other, but I know they never did see each other until he went back about 4 or 5 years later to get her, and they married in Chickasha and then brought her west. So she waited for him.
Wow, 4 or 5 years. Do you remember their names?
Yes, my great-grandparents were Isaac and Laura Yowell, Yowell. It's a Scottish name. And then my grandparents, my grandfather's name was Frank Boone Yowell. They had come from Kentucky. The family had come from Kentucky, hence he was named after Daniel Boone. And my grandmother was Holbrook. Her name was, my great-grandmother was, or my grandmother's name was Delora, or everybody called her Lou Holbrook, and she married my grandfather, like I said, and I think they married in about 1900 when he went back to fetch her from Chickasha.
That's a good story. Tell me about your parents. Let's start with your mother and her name.
My mother's name was Lois Cannon.
How do you spell her first name?
Her first name is Lois. Lois Cannon. And she was born in in western Oklahoma. I'm not sure just where. And her mother was a McCurdy, and they were also from Scotland. My father's mother was an orphan. Her mother died when she was quite young. She had 3 siblings, a younger brother. I think my grandmother must have died when the younger brother was born. And then there were 2 older sisters, and she was reared that the father abandoned them after the mother died, and she was taken to a Benedictine mission south of Shawnee, Oklahoma, at a place called Violet Springs. And the mission was run by the Benedictines, was called Sacred Heart. And they had there a home for orphaned Potawatomi children. And she was left there. So that's where she was reared, and she thought she was an Indian.
Oh.
As it turns out, she wasn't. We've had DNA tests, genetic tests done.
Yeah.
We have no Native American DNA at all, but she was raised among Native Americans and thought she was a Native American. And she sang the songs. She sang a death song when she died. My father sang the same song. I'm sure she taught it to him, but it was quite a surprise to us just in recent years to find out we were not part Native American, because my grandmother thought she was.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, she'd have every reason.
Yeah, culturally she was.
Sure. Yeah.
She
it's
was
more than just
yeah.
blood. And your father, what was his name?
Ernest Yao, or Ernie. Everybody called him Ernie.
And he was a rancher, farmer?
He was a farmer and a rancher, yes. He farmed with horses when I was a child in the 1930s. He, just prior to the beginning of World War II, he decided that he would come into the 20th century, and he bought a tractor and promptly ran over our favorite dog, yelling, "Whoa, whoa."
Oh, no.
And so he put the tractor aside and went back to farming with horses. And he farmed with horses all through World War II for the most part, because there was a shortage of gasoline. So I grew up with horses. We always had work horses and some saddle horses, but I was very partial to the work horses.
How would you describe your father's personality and your mom's personality, or what they were like?
My dad was a rather demanding, and I thought a harsh person. He demanded a lot of discipline and expected a lot from his children. I judged him a very harsh man growing up. I have since, particularly in my old age, I've softened my feelings about my father and recognized his influence on my life. And my mother, I have a poem about them, if I may.
Sure.
It's called Wild Plums. Before the clouds of war gathered, my grandfather built a clapboard house at the edge of the Great Plains. Grandmother painted it the color of egg yolk. That's where I was born on a sunflower morning. My father was a stubborn, silent man. My mother was an Irish girl who danced with him until dawn, when the west wind blew them together and filled their pockets with dust and hope. Father bought a team of mismatched horses and drove us to a Saturday town. I ran behind the wagon to prove my hardy independence and to pick wild plums in the fence rows. I admired socialists, hard-working anarchists, poets, green corn rebels, and my drunken Irish grandfather. I married hastily and often, but rarely repented, and never found a man who suited me. You don't have to ask what I mean by that. I traveled far and wide along the margins of the mainstream, through smoky cities and dark forests, following a narrative arc that curved back to that rutted wagon road. I have never found a better place to take a stand against bitterness, injustice, and all wrongs. My life is stained by wild plums. That kind of sums it up.
Yeah, that does. Yeah, they stay with us, don't they? Memories of our parents. And
Indeed.
yes. So siblings? Yeah. How many siblings?
I was the oldest of 7 children. One sibling died. A sister died as an infant. One brother, the brother just younger than me, died when I was 13 and he was almost 11. My sister, who's 5 years younger than me, I call her my first friend, and we're still friends as well as sisters. Then there was a 10-year gap, and my parents had their second family of 3 sons, one of whom was younger than my own son. He was born after I left home. He was never convinced that I was his sister. He used to think, I asked him once who he thought I was, and he said he thought I was our mother's sister. But yes, he and my son were only 6 months apart, but they were very, very close friends.
Do you have any memories with your siblings or stories that kind of stand out?
Well, sure. My sister and I, who have always been very, very close, we were little girls together, although I was 5 years older than her. We had a fairly close relationship, especially after our brother died. And she kind of looked to me for clues on how to handle things and how to deal with it. Our mother was went into a deep depression after my brother died. And so we sort of had to rely on each other. We also kind of took over the care of our baby brother because Clark was born just 2 months before my brother Cecil died, and we sort of took over the care of him, and we even in his first year we even took him to school with us sometimes. The little school there in Roger Mills County, they let us bring him to school. So when my mother was totally not well enough to look after him, we folded his baby buggy up and put it on the school bus, and we took him with us to school. So we were very, very close-knit, the children, the family. It's almost like we've kind of formed a little club of our own. And then our brother Jeff was born about 4 years later. He was the wit in the family. He was very funny. He died about 4 years ago. And then my youngest brother, Kevin, was very, very close to my son because of their nearness in age. They were only 6 months apart.
What was school like when you were little?
I loved school.
Yeah.
I couldn't wait to go to school, even when I was just 4 or 5 years old. The school bus would come by our house every morning, and I would find an old book in the house, a magazine, or anything I could that looked like school books or schoolwork, or a pencil and a tablet, and go stand by the road and pretend that the bus was going to stop for me. And the young man that drove the school bus would sometimes stop and let me get on the school bus and sit for a few minutes and then get off. But I couldn't wait to go to school. I loved school.
What was your favorite subject?
Oh, reading, of course. I loved reading. And then because the beginning of World War II was such an awakening for me.
Mm-hmm.
I developed an extremely avid interest in geography. And I remember my first geography book, I think it was in the 3rd grade. I can remember the format. I can remember exactly what it looked like
Mm-hmm.
and how it began with the first chapter was about Mesopotamia,
Mm-hmm.
the Fertile Crescent, the Tigris and the Euphrates. And for many years, geography was certainly during all the years of World War II, geography was my favorite subject.
What did you want to do after school? What were your dreams as a child?
Well, I wanted to. I really wanted to travel. I wanted to go to all those places that I'd read about in my geography book,
Mm-hmm.
and but it was several years before I was able to do that because I married and had a child. I always wanted, of course, to go on to school. I went to school for 1 year before my child was born, and then circumstances were such that I had to take a couple of years off, and then I started going to night school
Mm-hmm.
because I ended up a single mother. I had a child to support, and actually I went to night school to get my bachelor's degree, my master's degree, and then then I got a law degree, but I was in my 30s before I got the law degree, late 30s.
Mm-hmm.
I went to night school for 19 years.
For 19 years.
For 19 years, yeah.
Wow.
Altogether. I had to work to support my child, and I worked about 18 years I worked for the federal government during the day and went to school at night. My mother used to say, well, how long is this going to take you? And I'd say, well, however long. And she'd say, well, it seems like it's taken an awful long time. And one time she said to me, kind of pensively, she thought about it a minute, and she said, I suppose it does keep you off the streets at night.
Yeah.
I said, yes, Mother, it does that, for sure. I didn't watch TV for about 15 years.
Mm-hmm. How did you find the energy to keep going, or is it just one of those things where
it was just that I just knew I had to do it. I was just determined to do it, and so I went to school until my son was drafted during the Vietnam War, and I had planned to wait until after he was out of college to go to law school. But when it was obvious that he would have to go on to the Army or to the military service, he said to me, Mom, you just need to go ahead and do law school now. And I'll have the GI Bill when I get home. You won't have to have that expense. And so he went off to basic training 3 days before I entered law school, before I went to my first class law school.
So what was it about law that compelled you to study that?
I had been a court reporter for the military service. I worked in the staff judge advocate's office, and I developed an interest in the law from that. I'd sit and listen to all these cases and think sometimes I wouldn't have asked that question. I know what question I would have asked, and it finally got to the point where I was thinking to myself, I could do better than this. I could do better. And so I was determined to become a lawyer. It was, and it came very naturally to me. I was surprised at how quickly I was able to do that, and so it was my dream for many years to do that, and finally attained it, even though I was 40 years old before I was able to do that. And to go back to my hometown. I practiced the first 5 years in Texas, and before going back to Oklahoma, I wanted to go back, but I was advised by several lawyers not to do that it wasn't, sometimes you weren't accepted to go back in your hometown because they would remember you as as one of my professors said, I tried to practice in my hometown and they remembered me as a paper boy and no one trusted me with their legal work. But I found I was pleasantly surprised. My father convinced me to come home. Mm-hmm. He said, I think you'll be accepted. And I said, Dad, I don't know. They'll probably remember as the girl that picked cotton. And he said, no, I think they'll remember you as the girl that worked really, really hard. Mm-hmm. And he was right. First, when I went home, I moved home, it was right in the middle of the first oil and gas drilling boom in the 1970s. And I couldn't find anybody to help me in the office. So consequently, I had to meet clients during the day or go to court. And then in the evenings, I had to do my own clerical work. I had to type all my pleadings and everything. And one rancher who came in to ask if I would do legal work for him. And I said, why have you chosen me? There's the old law firms over in the county seat. And he said, well, I come through town late at night during harvest, sometimes as late as midnight, and I see your lights still on in here. And I think, well, she still has that work ethic, so that's who I'm going to go. So my father was right about that. I became what I would term successful in my law practice.
Were there other women who were practicing at that time?
Not very many. Yeah. Not many. No one in my county, and no one in the counties immediately adjoining me. I had some resistance from mostly older judges. Mm-hmm. They were a little reluctant to. They wanted me to be somebody's secretary rather than a lawyer. So there was some resistance.
Mm-hmm. And how did you deal with that?
Well, I had to. At first, I tried to be nice and polite, and that didn't work well. So I just decided to adopt a more aggressive stance until I made my mark. I ended up going to the Supreme Court on at least one occasion when I felt that I was being discriminated against, and was successful in that. And I guess I had finally kind of got my bluff in on them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. So were you writing poetry during this time, or?
No, I didn't. I guess I always scribbled little things, little stories. I feel that I was very fortunate because I knew all four of my grandparents, my mother's parents and my father's parents, and they were all storytellers. Mm-hmm. And that was our main form of entertainment, was reading and telling stories. My parents read to me and my siblings when we were young. My grandparents read to us. I remember particularly we subscribed to the Kansas City Star, and it came like a week late, but it didn't matter in those days because we lived so far out in the country, we didn't even have electricity, so we didn't have a radio until after World War II started. And my father, we didn't have electricity till actually after the war was over, because we lived far enough out in the wilderness that the rural electrification didn't come to us till 1947. But my father rigged up a wind charger, a windmill that would charge car batteries. Oh. And we had it in our yard, and he had built a little box, and he bought 4 6-volt car batteries. And during the day, he would attach the connections to them, and the wind charging would charge up the batteries. And then at night, he brought a battery in and hooked it up to a vacuum tube radio. And sometimes we'd have to change batteries 2 or 3 times if there was a lot of news. We weren't supposed to use that radio to listen to programs during the day because we had to save the battery for the what Dad called the war news. Mm-hmm. But sometimes if parents weren't home, when we came home from school, we turned it on anyway to listen to the Lone Ranger and Buck Rogers. And And if you're familiar with a vacuum tube radio, you know that it heats up. It has to warm up. And then before it'll actually, after you turn it on, before it actually starts receiving any sound. And the same thing when you turn it off, it takes it several hours to cool off. And so my father suspected what we were doing, and he'd come home when he came in from work at night. He'd put his hand on the back of the radio and said, "You've had the radio again. You've been listening to the radio, haven't you? I told you not to." He could always tell by the temperature of the radio. But anyway, that's how we got our news, and that's how we listened to stories there too.
Mm-hmm.
So always, but mostly it was the Kansas City Star. And on Wednesdays was Story Day. There was a whole section, a center section in the newspaper. There were stories for adults, there were serialized novels, and there were children's stories. And my brother and I used to go on Wednesday. We would go and stand down at the mailbox down by the road to wait for the postman, the mail carrier, to bring the Kansas City Star, and then we'd run back to the house with it and try to get somebody to read it to us. And then if we couldn't, we'd sit down, and I remember we'd lay down on the floor and spread the newspaper out and lay on our stomachs and try to figure the words out. So storytelling was really, and reading stories was really a big deal. When my father hooked those batteries up for the radio, we also eventually we got one electric lamp, or one bulb lamp, and we could use the battery to make that. And so we'd all sit around the kitchen table at night and read, and we'd study from that one lamp. That was a big deal in our life, because before that we used kerosene lamps.
Did you keep a journal or anything like that?
I did for a while. I didn't get serious about journal keeping until the 1960s, and I have probably, 100 or 150 journals that I've filled. A lot of my poems, a lot of the things I write about comes from that. I cannibalize those from time to time. I carry them with me everywhere I go. There's big boxes of my journals.
So when did you start studying or writing poetry?
Oh,
seriously?
Yes. The poetry business, I didn't realize I was writing poetry until after my son. My son died in 1989, and was the watershed of my life. The boy's death was, and I think I started becoming more introspective and writing more. It seemed to be some comfort to write my memories of him, and even other memories, just to remember, trying to make some sense of my life, some meaning, because I had some trouble with that once my son died. And I had a secretary who collected the writings, my jottings, and first told me that she thought they were poetry. And so I began reading poetry again. I had read poetry through all my academic life, but I'd kind of given it up because I was so busy with my law practice. But I started reading poetry, and I discovered Wilma Elizabeth McDaniel, and that's when I looked at her and what she had written, and I thought, this is exactly what I want to say. These are the kinds of things I want to say. And so in the early 1990s, I began writing, and she was a great inspiration to me. She gave me the courage to actually expose my feelings and to record them and to share them with other people. So I owe her a lot.
Yeah. So when did you start thinking of yourself as a poet?
Probably in the mid 1990s. There was a group of people in my hometown that decided, a couple of teachers or retired teachers and a fellow lawyer and the judge, And somehow the poetry thing, I can't remember who brought it up, but we had this idea that we would get together and read poetry. And it was about the same time that Edward Hirsch was appointed the Poet Laureate of the United States, and he started a project called My Favorite Poem Project, and the internet was becoming was available to more people, and he started he had a website, and people could post their poems on there, and he would read their poems. And so my favorite poem was kind of it became popular. People started noticing it, and so we decided we would start a group where we'd read our favorite poems. And for a couple of years, I didn't read my own poems. I just read favorite poems. But it was a lot of fun. And people, even farmers and people you wouldn't think were that interested in poetry, started coming, and they became. It was sort of a race. People would drive all the way to Oklahoma City to the bookstores on Saturday to choose poetry books, to find new poetry to read. It was fun to see all those old guys hunting through the poetry section, at the bookstores in Oklahoma City and even in Elk City. In the libraries, they haunted the libraries. And I can remember when I decided to read some of my own poetry, there was a rancher from Elk City came to one of our readings, and he read his own poetry. And when we finished and he was ready to leave, he said, "I don't understand why you're not reading your own poetry. Surely somebody here writes poetry." And he looked at me and he said, "I'll bet you write poetry." And I said, "Nah, sort of." And he said, "You're missing a great opportunity if you don't read your own poetry, because it's a lot of fun." And I got to thinking, well, if he has the nerve to read his poetry, because he was writing cowboy poetry. Yeah. And so I pulled some of my poems out and I started reading them then. And that was in about 1996, 97. And it just went from there. And when I saw that people didn't laugh at me and didn't turn up their noses at my poetry, I gathered some courage, and then I started branching out and going to Oklahoma City and reading poetry in bookstores and things where they have poetry readings. And by 2002, I had decided to publish poetry. So that's when I formed the Village Books Press.
Yeah, tell me about that.
Well, Roger Mills County is in the Old Cheyenne and Arapaho Nation, and every 5 years they have a commemorative events in Cheyenne. Actually, there's 5 towns involved in the Cheyenne Arapaho Nation, and there's a celebration each year, so it comes around to each town every 5 years. And so for the 2002, when I realized it was coming up and they asked for suggestions for things to do, it occurred to me that I could have a poetry reading. And so I proposed that to the committee, the Pioneer Celebration Committee, and they said, "Well, that sounds like a good idea, do it." And that was probably 18 months before, that was in sometime in 2000. And I thought, oh, wow, I need to figure out, I need to have a book to read, something to show that I'm actually a poet, and I need to collect. And so my secretary in my law office, and I said, "How could we do this?" And she said, "Well, it's really easy. I can print them. You write the poems, I'll print them, and then we'll staple them together in chapbooks." And so that's what we did. And we named it Village Books Press because my partner, Davy Napier, and I had by that time we had some little art galleries and a bookshop and a tea shop, coffee shop. And we called it the Village Books. And so I said, well, we'll call our company the Village Books Press. And so we did. And that's how Village Books Press was born. 2002, we came out with my book, and later in the year, we published a book for Judith Tate O'Brien and Jane, what's Jane's name?
Taylor?
Jane Taylor.
Yeah, Vincent Taylor. Yeah.
Anyway, and it was a finalist for the Oklahoma Book Award in that. And about every year until last year, we had at least a finalist, and we've actually won 6 of the grand prize book awards for poetry in Oklahoma. And then we started publishing. Eventually, we started publishing for Texas poets and New Mexico poets, and we published a Kansas poet, and so it just went from there.
I'd like to go back to Wilma Elizabeth McDaniel and her work and how she influenced you. So she left Oklahoma, and we were kind of talking about this before we started
Yes,
this interview, and you both write about similar themes, but she left and you stayed. So how would you compare and contrast your interpretation of home and place versus hers?
Well, she, of course, left physically because her parents left during the Great Depression. She didn't have much choice in that. And she lived the rest of her life in California. I can't remember for sure. I don't think she ever visited Oklahoma. She might have one time. She was planning a trip near the end of her life, but she didn't get to do that. But at any rate, she certainly lived in the Great Central Valley of California the rest of her life. But she remained an Okie. She wrote about Okies almost exclusively, not totally, but Okies either back from her memories in Oklahoma or or about Okies in California. So, as I've said in some of my writing, she was a true Okie, and so was I. My family didn't leave, but in spirit, I don't think Wilma Elizabeth ever left either. So, and of course, I don't live in Oklahoma now. I've lived many places. There's several other places for short periods of time, a year to 4 or 5 years, until I came to New Mexico, where I live now. But I'll always be an Okie. No matter where I am, I'll always be an Oklahoma. And I think, as someone said one time, you are Oklahoma, Dorothy.
And is there a poem of yours that really reminds you of that, of what it means to be Oklahoma?
The first poem that I ever called a poem, I think is sort of indicative of what it's like. As my sister said recently, no matter what else we've done in life, Dorothy, we mustn't forget we came from a cotton field. We came from a cotton patch. And that's true. A lot of my young life was spent in my father's cotton field. And the first poem that I wrote that I thought was a poem is called A Hard Row. And it goes like this. We hoed cotton in the heat of summer. Come late fall, we picked it. We pulled ribbons of canvas as we threaded our way between the rows, like inchworms on a leaf. I dragged a 10-foot sack until the strap creased my shoulder a finger width deep. It stayed there 20 years before town living and paperwork erased the weight of all that cotton. I did notice when I left the farm and never did go back, it still took many years. I had calluses on the palms of my hands from picking cotton, from pumping water with a hand pump and doing all the things you do on a farm. And it did take about 20 years for all the calluses to totally disappear from the palm of my hand. And when I noticed they were gone, there was a sort of a sadness came, And I thought, that's the last vestige of my farm life.
Mm-hmm.
But poetry has taken the place of the calluses. Poetry is now my calluses that shows
Yeah, that's a good way.
where I've been.
Good way to put it. So when did you feel like you found your voice as a poet? Was it after you wrote this first book, or did it take more time?
Well, it gradually came. When I found the book, I considered the Little Dust Bowl Revisited book to be a success, if you will, because it was very popular. It still sells today. I don't even know how many copies of it I've sold. And it resonates with especially people in my age group. I've read it in senior citizen gatherings and along with some of my other books, and in assisted living facilities and that sort of thing. And it really resonates. So that made me, when I realized that I was reaching poets, reaching other people, reaching out, the readers saw something of themselves in what I said about myself. I considered that to be the work of a poet, and that I had achieved that, or that I was achieving it, because I could reach. And when I read my poetry, when I saw recognition on people's faces, yes, and I remembered, when I hear a poem that resonates with me, I think, oh yeah, that's what I wanted to say. And many people have told me that my poetry says what they wanted to say. So that's when I started feeling like a real poet.
Yeah, and this idea of reaching other people, you definitely do that with your work, and then also with your press. So how do you think your press has helped poets in Oklahoma? We have a lot of great poets here. Poetry's personal.
I think that a lot of that there are many people who write poetry that have something important to say, something important to hear, and that many poets don't get heard because there's a lot of competition for attention to what people are saying, and that it's easier to get someone's attention if your work is in print. Then you can reach a lot more people than just trying to see people personally. And so that, excuse me, if you really want to reach people, your work needs to be in print. It needs to have a medium for distribution. And I heard so many poets and Oklahoma poets that had something to say that I thought was important to hear, and I wanted to help get the word out. I love poets and I love poetry, and it's like having your own children. You want the world to see what your children are like and what they have to say, and it's fun. It's just a lot of fun. So it's something that's been very satisfying to me and continues to be satisfying to just see people's face light up when they hear good poetry. And other writing too, but poetry primarily. I heard a fellow say one time, if it's too silly to say out loud, you can always sing it. I think about poetry, if it's too sensitive to just say outright, then you can write a poem about it. You can come at it from poetically, and it becomes more meaningful and to both the speaker and the hearer.
I'm looking at all of the books you've published and all of my notes here that I have of your work, and I'm wondering how you think you've grown as a poet since that first 2002.
Oh, I think that I've come a long way. That may not be for me to judge, but the more I'm exposed to other people's poetry, the more my own poetry, the more it seems to enhance my own poetry, because I'll be frank with you, I steal from other people. I steal their style. And if someone else is saying something I think is important, then it urges me to say what I think is important on that subject. And so I still think I grow every day. I don't think there's any end to it. As long as there's poets writing, there's something to be learned.
Yeah. What do you think your body of work means or represents thus far?
I think it's a representation of rural life that I'd like to see preserved. As I've said before, I think my poetry is a lot of it is gossip, but I don't think gossip is necessarily a pejorative term. Wilma Elizabeth's poetry is gossip, and it preserves something that's worth preserving. And our commentary on each other's lives has always been important, no matter what you call it. You call it gossip or advice or opinion or whatever. It's still important, I think.
Yeah.
I loved hearing my grandmother when I was a little girl, when her friends would come, and my grandmother was a great quilt maker, and she had a quilting group, had a group of ladies that came to her house periodically. I can't remember whether it was once a week or once a month or exactly, but I was an important part of that, in the fact that the ladies all sat around the quilt that was suspended from the ceiling on frames, and sometimes they pushed their needle all the way through the quilt without getting it back up in the stitch. And so someone had to go under the table, under the quilt, and push the needle back up, and that was my job as a little girl. I laid under the quilt, and when someone pushed a needle through, I had to jump up and push the needle back, and in the process, I listened to them talk. And I was fascinated. I was fascinated with their discussions and their talk about their lives and what they thought and what was important to them. And it was just, it was an important part of my education.
Yeah.
And I think poetry that incorporates all of that is important. I think it makes us more human.
Yeah.
I think that's why it's called humanities.
Yeah, and that kind of goes with my another question I wanted to ask to kind of follow up on that. So we talked a little bit about what you think your work says about life, but what about love, identity, human frailty, and about Oklahoma as well, that we haven't already mentioned?
Well, of course, it all of that counts. All of that's part of the total human story, our sadnesses and our failings, as well as our successes and our fun part. When my son died, my mother seemed to think that if we didn't talk about it, that it would not be so hurtful. And so she tried not to mention it. But for me, I wanted to talk about it, and it seemed to help. And so I wrote. That became the focus of my writing, of my poetry, off and on for several years, and I still write about my son. So I think it's important that we talk about all of the things that make us who we are, the sad things, even the bad things, as well as the pleasant things, because they are certainly part of life, and sometimes they're play a bigger part in growth than the easy times.
Yeah. So if you had to choose a poem or two to capture who you are as a poet, what would it be, and could you read it?
Well, that's kind of a hard
I know.
question. Perhaps one about my father and my relationship to him, because it, like I said, it's become more important to me especially as I become older. Let's see if I can find the poem about my father. I thought I marked it, but I don't see it now. Page 44. This is a poem that at first I called it Planting Time. Now I call it Breaking Ground. It's for my father, Ernest Yowell, who lived from 1912 to 1997. When Dad farmed with horses, stumbling like a man with one short leg, trying to plow a straight row, I ran behind him on bare feet, dizzy with the smell of damp sod, the sight of wriggling earthworms, and the tiny rocks striped like marbles and white roots that lay bare to the sun. Once overcome by the mystery of cool, sweet dirt, I lay face down on the ground and touched the grittiness with my tongue, then ran to catch up with Dad's broad shadow as he guided reluctant Rowdy and gentle Nancy, straining their horse muscles, encouraged by his clicking tongue. Weaving a wake of open earth, our little caravan, horses, plow, man, and child, moved slowly over fields that rolled up like swells in open sea, and we plowed straight ahead until dark. I still follow my father's receding shadow, but now I'm the one stumbling along, trying to keep a straight row over this rough ground. And I think that sums up more than just the relationship with my father. It sums up my own philosophy, if you will, because I think even though I am quickly coming on to my 85th birthday, I still struggle. I still strive to keep going, to keep trying to learn what I'm here for and to speak. I will say this, even though I'm practically 85 years old, inside I still feel like I'm 35. Inside, never mind my arthritis and all my other complaints, inside I'm still 35. Yeah. But yes, I still think I'm still curious. I'm still trying to figure it all out. And probably, I think in one of my poems I say it's not over yet, and I've still got a lot to do, and my end basket will still probably be overflowing the day I leave here. Yeah.
You know, listening to you read and experiencing that, this makes me wonder what you think reading poetry out loud does for not only the poet, but for the audience and the poem itself.
Well, I think hearing a poet read is very important to both the poet and the hearer, the audience. I tell all the poets that I think do good work, I encourage them to read their poetry out loud, if for no one but themselves. All of my poetry, before I consider a poem finished, if I ever do that, sometimes I revise them. I'm like Wilma Elizabeth. She revised her poems after she had published them. And I do that too sometimes. But I think that hearing them, the words spoken, is important, and it's important to hear your own poems. I don't consider one finished until I've read it and I'm satisfied, at least partway with the way it sounds. Plus, maybe I'm like the older woman that was in our poetry group when I asked her once why we like to read the poetry so much. She said, because we all, my dear, like to hear the sound of our own voices. And maybe that's part of it. Maybe we need to hear our own voices as well as other people's. it gives me confidence, and it confirms what I'm trying to say. If it doesn't confirm, then I know I haven't gotten it right yet.
Yeah. It's a good thought. I'd like to spend some time talking about your creative process. So could you take me through that first impulse or mood or sensation or line you might get for a poem in those early drafts until you're done? You talked a little bit about how you might know, but how do you really know?
Oh, well, that's a very deep question. I get ideas. Of course, as I've said before, I've kept a journal for years and years. I've kept a journal for, I don't know what, 50 years or close to 60 years. And through the years, I've written down all these little things, and as the thoughts occur to me, for instance, just today, I remembered Merwin's poem, "The Lives of the Artists," which is about a Cheyenne, a Native American of the Cheyenne tribe who was trying to escape to go back to his home when they had tried to keep him on a reservation. And he was shot in the back. And when they found his body under his shirt, under his shirt that was made out of animal skins, they found an old ledger book with his drawings, and he had tied it to his body with leather thongs. It was tied to his back, and the bullet holes had gone through it. But he was traveling, and he was taking his art with him. And Merwin discovered this he wrote a poem about it, a long poem. Once he saw this in the Smithsonian institution devoted to America, the one that's devoted to American Indian. And that's always resonated with me. And once you and I were talking about the various poets, it occurred to me that I should write about the lives of the poets. Maybe minor poets, as the case may be, but just sometimes in conversation, or something I hear on the radio, or something I hear another poet see, or something I've read, and it just, when it strikes a chord, I jot it down. And then when I'm ready to write, when I'm in a mood to write poems, I look through those notes, and something will strike me. If not that one, it's something I wrote yesterday or the day before, or something I read. And then I just write it down, whatever I can think of, even if it's silly, if it's something I wouldn't read or say to anybody, another human being. There's a lot in my journals I wouldn't want anybody else to see, because I think it's kind of silly and perhaps meaningless. But once it sets for a while and I go back and look at it, it strikes some kind of a chord. There's always something in the past, something in the present. You can always relate to the past, and vice versa. So a lot of my things that I wrote down 30, 40 years ago that didn't really resonate too much with me then, other than enough to write it down. Now when I look at it and I think of something that happened yesterday, I think, oh, wow, that relates. And then I start working on it, and I just start writing whatever comes to mind. And once again, it's stuff that I wouldn't want anybody else to see. I sometimes write 50 or 60 lines, and I may get 5 good lines out of that. But it's just a matter of sorting out the wheat from the chaff.
Yeah, I like that. Is there a particular sort of ambiance environment that you like when you write? Do you need total silence? Does noise bother you? Do you have to have a particular place or ritual?
Well, of course, I like my little messy study where my computer is there handy, because once I get an idea and I start exploring it, the internet has been a really tremendous resource, because right now I'm writing on a series of poems called on the nature of time and whether or not it exists. And so I can go online and find out what all the philosophers through the ages have said about time, sift through that and get ideas. So I like to be where I have access to the internet. And if not the internet, I can look back through it. I usually have a journal. I carry a journal with me in my purse or my handbag or my briefcase. I almost always have a journal with me, and if I have a moment, I flip through that and see if something rings a bell. But mostly I like to be by myself when I'm trying to write. I can't watch TV and write.
Yeah. What's your best writing advice to poets?
If you would be a writer, you must first be a reader. That's just that's I think if it's not in the Bible, it should be. You can't expect to write unless you have read. Yes. It's as important as breathing if you want to be a writer.
How do we encourage the next generations of poets in Oklahoma to keep going, keep creating that we can right here?
I think that children are, I think all children may be born poets. One of the things that we did back in Oklahoma when we were doing the publishing was every year our little arts council, we sponsored a writing contest for children for schools. We drew a circle and sent invitations to all the schools within a 50-mile radius. I think one year we branched out 75, which included part of Texas. And we garnered, I mean, literally hundreds and hundreds of children's writings. And then we'd have a reading for them, and we published little anthologies of their writing each year. And we had a section for each grade, each step. And children came and read, and they were those children, to see their stuff in print, to see their work. And their parents came, and I mean, it was really a lot of fun. And I think opportunities like that for children is not amiss. And we've had children. We published a poem of a little boy who was 5 in one of our anthologies. It was a 3-line poem. Can't remember exactly how it went. It was something like, that pretty little bug only wanted to cross the street, and you smashed him.
Yeah. I like it.
So he got in the anthology. He's a grown man now, and when I sometimes see him and his mother in Oklahoma City, I mention that poem, and his face turns red.
Oh, should it?
Yeah.
Kind of says a
Yeah,
lot.
but anyway, yes, I think children, I love children's poems.
So can I ask you about your red hat?
My red hat
collection. What's the story on that?
Well, I had to conform to a dress code for so many years in my life. When I started working for the federal government in 1956, and for 25 years maybe, 20 years at least, we had to dress a certain way. We could not wear slacks. We couldn't, we had to have blouses and jackets and all that sort of thing. And I wore pantyhose and high heels. And all those years I kept thinking, when I am through with all these rules, I'm going to dress the way I want to. And so when I started writing poetry, I was in a thrift store actually here in Santa Fe. Debbie and I were in a thrift store, I think at Goodwill. And there was this red fedora. And my heart just leapt. And I thought, that's it. That's what I want to wear. So I bought a red fedora, and I still have it. And it's, I don't know. It's funny what a hat will do for you. People remember you if you have a hat. People are more likely to remember you. They're more likely to pay attention to what you're doing and what you're saying. Of course, then the Red Hat Society came along and confirmed what I thought.
Yeah.
But I've just always, and of course I wear the color hats now, but I have found that if you want an audience, you might think about wearing a hat.
Yeah.
And red is
Yeah.
a very
a
cheerful color.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier that you're working on some poems and prose on the nature of time. Is there anything else that you're working on currently? Any other works?
Well, I'm working on a memoir for my son about my son's illness and death during the AIDS epidemic of the 1980s. I'm also working on a family memoir with my sister. It'll be it won't just be genealogy charts. We do have some of that because we've both worked on genealogy. We've both done the DNA test, but mostly it will be profiles of the people that we remember and the stories. My grandmother, my father's mother, who was, as I've said, was an orphan herself, was raised in an orphanage and didn't know a lot about her family. She sort of took her mother-in-law, my grandfather's mother, sort of became her mother, and she repeated all the stories that from my grandfather's family. And so I remember those stories because I listened very intently when I was a child. I could remember the stories. And so we're putting that together. That's two of the projects. I'm also working on a story, the account of a woman who was taken captive by Indians in the late in 1868 in southeastern Colorado, and she ended up in a winter camp along the Washita River, where I was very near the place where I was born and where I grew up. And she was killed, I think, accidentally by Custer's troops. They thought she was an Indian woman. She thought she was being rescued. Her name was Clara Blinn, and Clara Blinn has been the footnote in many, many accounts of that battle, but never a book about her. So I'm working on a book about Clara. And of course, there's my ongoing poetry. I hope to have a new book of poems, at least a chapbook out by spring. And I have a couple of people in line that I'm publishing. Paul Austin, a book by Paul Austin, who's Rilla Askew's husband. I have his manuscript, and I'll have it published before Scissortail. So I'm cutting back on my publishing. Terry Cummings, a poet in Oklahoma City, is gradually taking over and helping with the publishing, because I realize I'd like to see Village Books go on and dedicated to the same purposes that I have. And Terry is very interested in doing that. So that's kind of where I am. Plus, I have some projects with the poets here in Santa Fe. There's a wonderful community of poets here, and we'd like to, if possible, we'd like to replicate my book of ekphrastic poetry and art that I did in Lessons from an Oklahoma Girlhood, because there's a lot of women artists here, and I would like to match their art with my poetry and some of the other women poets here in Santa Fe, and do the same thing. This was a very well received book of women artists and my poetry that we published back about 10 years ago. So those are the things that I'm working on.
Yeah, that's a lot. Is there anything else that you'd like to talk about? That
I would like to read one poem to commemorate my son's life or his passing. My son was a wonderful man, a very kind and considerate man. And this is about him. It's called Year of the Plague, for Kim Alexander, who lived from 1953 to 1989. I hated everyone in that place then. Oh, I knew they were just messengers, but what I'm saying is that if someone had to die, I wanted it to be anyone but this man made of my own flesh. I wanted to take him away from that white place where everyone wore dry-eyed masks, where they didn't look us in the eye when they spoke in the sly 1980s language, judging sickness itself immoral. What did they see when they looked past us, talking of T-cells, Kaposi sarcoma, and pneumocystis? I could have carried him in my own arms all the way to the moon or anywhere. He was that light. I could have taken him home on the boat we built to hold a cargo of black skies and falling mercury. But the body temple shattered, the pieces scattered like dropped china dolls, walls caved in, pulled away from the foundation, the roof slid sideways, the windows shattered, and the heart was broken. There was a shudder as he put out to sea, drifting westward into the misty distance, while on shore someone was waving, running, and calling his name over and over.
Thank you, Kat. Thank you so much for your time and your hospitality. This was great.
Thank you for your interest and for your hard work. I appreciate what you're doing, and I'm looking to see the final result.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.